would be off the table, and we'd really be back to square one where we were in 1986.
That was my next question, that I prefer you to elaborate a bit, and I will probably ask the NOPSI representatives when they come before us. What impact would it have upon the friendly buyout if we sort of breached that settlement that was accepted in 1986?
From the city advisor's perspective, we would want to continue with the terms of the friendly buyout. But that is an agreement that has two parties' consent. And it's up to NOPSI as to whether they would continue to agree to the terms that are anticipated in that friendly buyout. And I think they can answer that question.
So you suggest that I raise that question with them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Councilmember Wilson.
Mr. Ortman, I wanted to ask you the amount of this phase-in, the original agreement, is that based on the amount of money that the city was allocated as was its share, according to the FERC?
Yes, Councilman Wilson. That was based on the 17% allocation that FERC ordered NOPSI to take.
Now, what was our original allocation?
The original allocation that NOPSI had agreed to was almost 30%. The council participated in the FERC proceedings, strongly fighting for a reduction of that share of Grand Gulf to NOPSI to the 8 or 9% amount that NOPSI comprises as part of the entire Entergy system.
And so that was, so as a result of the action of the city council, that was reduced from 29 or almost 30 to 17?
That's correct.
Okay, and then has it been further reduced? Has the amount of that phase-in been further reduced in any way? What would it have been? What was the percentage under the 17%?
As I mentioned, in February 1988, the council issued its prudence disallowance order, which essentially found that NOPSI was imprudent in certain decisions with respect to its role in the Grand Gulf project. And as a consequence of that finding, which is in litigation now at NOPSI's hands, as a result of that finding, the council disallowed $135 million of the costs that NOPSI incurred for Grand Gulf. That allowed the council to trim the 6% increases to 4.5%. I think Mr. Cease can tell you what that rate level would have been but for that 4.5% reduction.
Yeah, under the 6% plan, we expect, like I said, the rates would eventually rise to about $112 for an average residential customer per month. And under the current 4.5% plan, the monthly residential bill will be we expect to be no higher than about $93 per month. So we're talking about a $13 difference for the average residential customer in future years.
And what we're looking at today is part of something that was agreed upon in, what, 1986, you said?
That's right.
But even though we agreed on this in 1986, it has to be re-examined every year?
The filing itself is anticipated under the agreement. The agreement contemplated that NOPSI would come in each year and file for rate increases pursuant to those terms. The design of the rate increases could be changed among customers and whatnot, but basically they were pretty automatic as far as that agreement was concerned, and this is the fifth in a line of perhaps up to 9 or 10 increases contemplated under that phase-in plan.
So the agreement was, the time to consider the merits of this agreement took place the most fully in 1986, and then this is just kind of the
That's right.
reaffirmation of that. And in the meantime, it's been reduced even further because of the $135 million reduction.
That's right. We don't mean to minimize the burden that Grand Gulf is upon the ratepayer. As Mr. Cease indicated before, Grand Gulf constitutes almost 38% of a monthly bill that every residential customer sees right now. That will increase to 40% with this increase and climb even higher throughout the rest of the phase-in plan, and that's because we are starting now to pay some of the costs that were previously deferred. So Grand Gulf remains an enormous amount of costs that in a customer's bill, and that amount is growing in the future.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Jackson.
I heard the explanations to Councilmember Taylor's about what happened if we breach the agreement that was made in 86. And one of your response was simply that if in fact it would somewhat jeopardize the friendly buyout, I guess the question is that if in fact the friendly buyout occurs, then would this council and the ratepayers have greater latitude to consider readjusting any rate hike?
Of course, if the buyout proposal that will be considered in April-May is adopted, then this phase-in plan will end with the city's acquisition of NOPSI, and a totally new rate regime will be placed into effect. It's our expectation that rates would be lower under that scenario than they will be under the present status quo, or under the scenario where NOPSI prevails in court on the $135 million disallowance. But the rate plan will end if it happens, and if a takeover would occur in 1990, the rate plan will end when the keys are turned over to the city, if it happens in 1991 or whenever, as long as the phase-in plan continues.